If these theories end up being true, this is going to be one of the most diabolical cases in true crime history. And the thing is, I think if you've been watching true crime long enough, you know that as far-fetched as these theories might sound, we've actually seen things like this happen before. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, well then buckle in, because we are going to jump right in today. I'm going to skip my little intro I usually do because I just want to get into this with you guys. Because if you've literally been anywhere today, you've seen hundreds of clips telling you that the police missed something, or the husband did it, or the evidence that just doesn't add up. And I totally get why these rumors spread, because they're kind of built on something that technically might be true. But first, no prosecutor has accused Patrick Clancy of anything. He has not been charged, he's not a suspect, and both the prosecution and the defense agree that Lindsay is the one who physically whatted the children. The fight in the trial that we are all seemingly mesmerized by is all about the state of her mental health. And this is actually incredibly important because it really could change the trajectory of how we treat postpartum in the future. And it could mean that we're holding mental health professionals to a higher standard. What I'm going to do is I'm going to present you with every single theory, also present you with something that might have been missed in concocting that theory and give you a little bit of context, and also talk about what does that mean for this case if that theory does turn out to be true. So with all of that being said, let's get started. The discourse online surrounding postpartum has gotten people really up in arms, and honestly, most people have never experienced it themselves. They've never known someone to experience it, and they haven't really had it explained to them properly. And that includes some doctors. So I do want to share this, but I'm going to fully admit that I am not somebody who has ever experienced this. So I'm going to be leaving a lot of resources down in that pinned comment, and I do invite anyone who has more education to correct me in the comments or just open up a respectful discussion in the comments. But the thing is that there are some different things that get lumped together, but the gap between them is kind of massive, because the first is just kind of thrown away. Women who've just had a baby, they're having the baby blues. They're weepy, they have mood swings, exhaustion, obviously, in the first couple of weeks, and it's considered to be incredibly common. Something of like half to 3/4 of new mothers get some version of it, and it does usually pass on its own. And now, the second wave of this is something that can be diagnosed as postpartum depression, which is a lot more serious and longer lasting and affects roughly 10 to 13% of new mothers. So that's about 1 in 8 mothers experience this. And that is the one that most of us have heard of, probably. But there is an important distinction between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. Postpartum psychosis is a completely different animal. It is incredibly rare, and it shows up in about 1 to 2 births out of every 1,000. And it's not just a sadness, a depression, a tiredness. It is the complete opposite spectrum of what baby blues might be considered. It is a complete break with reality. We're talking hallucinations, delusions, severe agitation, and this manic energy and kind of a crushing despair that swings from one end of that spectrum to the other in the very same day. And on top of all of that, insanely terrifying, intrusive thoughts. I think that when we talk about intrusive thoughts, sometimes it's really easy to gloss over that, and people don't fully understand what an intrusive thought is. An intrusive thought can be the thought of or impulse to do something so horrifying and horrific that you almost feel guilty for having the thought itself. As someone who's dealt with mental health, it can, manifest as an unaliving ideation, and then you kind of get scared that you had that thought, and you might either freak out and seek help or fall into a deeper depression or start to come up with ideas of how to do it. In the context of postpartum depression, this could manifest as a severe hatred for your children. You could start blaming your children for some of the feelings you're experiencing within your psychosis, and you might have those feelings or thoughts or impulses to harm them. And if you're in the midst of a psychosis, it's a lot more intense than having an intrusive thought and being aware that you're having a thought that maybe you need to mitigate or get help while you're thinking of it. It is such a separation from your true self that it almost feels like you can't control it. And this is really scary because around 90% of cases do begin within the first 4 weeks after birth. This is a ripe time where the mother is incredibly vulnerable. And of course, the newborn is so vulnerable and helpless. And doctors do classify it as a psychiatric emergency. It's essentially the mental health equivalent of a heart attack, where every single hour or minute can matter. Now, here are the numbers that make this case what it is, and I want to say them very carefully because they're actually really heavy. In untreated postpartum psychosis, studies estimate roughly a 4% rate of a mother harming her child and about a 5% rate of unaliving. It means that 90-something% of women who go through this never hurt anybody at all, because it doesn't necessarily mean that the illness is a symptom for danger. It means that this is one psychiatric condition that's consistently linked to a mother harming her own baby, and that when the very worst does happen, it happens towards the people that she loves the most. It's really the cruelest possible shape an illness can take, and it is this exact shape that's at the center of this trial. So, why is it so hard to catch? There are several reasons why, and they're all showing up in Lindsay's case. It is very rare, so a lot of providers have never seen it. The chief medical correspondent for ABC News, a board-certified OBGYN, said that she'd never personally encountered a case in 22 years of her career. It also is not a standalone diagnosis in the main psychiatric manual doctors use, which sounds like a technicality, but genuinely makes it harder to name and harder to build a defense around. It also hides behind shame because a mother having a thought to harm her child is going to be terrified to say that out loud to anybody, so obviously she's going to bury it deep down within her and never sound the alarm. And this feeling can also fluctuate, so a woman can seem completely lucid and appropriate in a 15-minute appointment and then be in a full breakdown an hour later. So I just want you to hold on to all of that while we move through the rest of these theories, because every single one of them lives or dies on this one question. Was Lindsay in that 4% nightmare, or was she a person who knew exactly what she was doing? So I want to offer a quick timeline as well, because the theories only really make sense if you know the order in which they happened. So Callan, the third baby, is born in May of 2022, and that summer on the shared laptop is the Tom Hall search that we're going to come back to. It was 5 months before anything happens. So by the fall of that year, Lindsay is really starting to struggle, and in September she starts seeing a psychiatrist for anxiety, depression, and insomnia, and it will just not break. She gets Zoloft, then Ativan, then Ambien, and the medication list just keeps climbing because it seems like nothing is working. And throughout that fall, she's writing notes to herself about drowning as a mother. In November, she is so wrecked by no sleep that she goes to an emergency room. In December, she even confides in Patrick that she's having thoughts of harming herself and the children. On New Year's Eve, she's hospitalized, and in early January, she spends about 5 days as an inpatient at McLean Hospital, one of the best psychiatric facilities in the county, before she is discharged. And days after that, the family throws a 5th birthday party for Cora, and her brighter mood gives Patrick hope. In the 3rd week of January, her phone is searching for information on bipolar disorder, then hallucinations, then psychosis. And on January 20th, 4 days before the killings, she searches the phrase, "Can you treat a sociopath?" On January 24th, around 5 in the evening, she texts Patrick to pick up medicine for one of the kids and grab takeout. And he's gone for about 25 minutes. And he comes home to the unthinkable. Cora and Dawson die that night. Callan, the baby, holds on for 3 more days before he dies in the hospital. And he also finds his wife, who appeared to have jumped to her death from a window. So, with that timeline and tragedy all being lined up for us, let's get into the theories. So, the first theory that's on everyone's tongue is that Patrick made the unaliving search. This is the one that's been taking over the internet. So, the witness is State Police Sergeant Kyle Paveo from the Cybercrime Unit, and he examined a Microsoft Surface Pro that came out of the Clancy home. On direct, the prosecution walks him to a search that lands on a Wikipedia page for unaliving methods, which sounds like a bombshell until you watch the path that it took to get there. So back on August 23rd, 2022, which is 5 months prior to the event, somebody on that laptop searched that musician we mentioned earlier, Tom Hall, after listening to him on Spotify. They went to his Wikipedia page, scrolled to the part that explains Hall died by unaliving, and then clicked a link from there to a general page about unaliving methods, and then clicked again onto a page about a specific bridge. So the trail starts with that musician and then wanders, not with someone sitting down to research how to harm themselves and their children. So here's where the theory starts to feel like it could actually be real. On cross-examination, Paveo admits that the laptop belonged to Patrick, that it was found in Patrick's office, and that he cannot tell you who was physically at the keyboard. All of this is true. But 2 facts detonate the clean version of this. Number 1, Patrick already testified earlier in the same trial that he was the one who looked up Tom Hall because he was a fan and played guitar. So the mystery searcher isn't really a mystery anymore. And number 2, Paveo also testified that the Facebook account that later hit that unaliving methods page had a web address that partially spelled out Lindsay's name. So it's this same chain of clicking on different web pages, and it creates this thread that actually points at both of them. So when you strip it all away, what you actually have is this shared family device 5 months prior to the event where nobody can prove who clicked what, and where the one detail people find sinister already has an innocent on the record owner. It is genuinely kind of murky. It's not necessarily a confession, and anybody selling it to you as one is selling you the edit, not necessarily the evidence. But let's say that this is how it all actually played out. If it was just some innocent search that led someone down a random path online, I think we've all been there. But if we were able to determine that actually Lindsay did make this search, it really means that she was in a very dangerous place mentally. And it means that a lot of these medical professionals may have really, really failed her. Because I think after hearing the timeline I laid out, it's very clear that she was trying to figure out what was going on inside her head. But on the opposite side, and this leads into the second theory, and it's kind of like the grown-up version of that argument, Lindsay's attorney, Kevin Reddington, spent a big chunk of his cross-hammering the investigators on one question. Can you actually prove who was on the family's shared devices at any specific moment? And the honest answer was that they often can't. Reddington, who I think is like performing a master class in what it is to be a great attorney, it's incredible to watch him work, really. And it does seem like he is using a lot of tactics to try to subconsciously even raise reasonable doubt in the jury to protect Lindsay. And the thing that makes this theory even a little bit more solid, that it was not her who is searching these keywords, but it was actually her husband, is she wasn't even at the home at the time. She had back-to-back appointments for the children right around the August search window. So She likely wasn't even at that keyboard. Now, here's why the defense cares so much about this, and it's actually pretty smart. The prosecution's entire theory is that she was cold and calculated and deliberately planning this. So if you chip away at whether Lindsay personally made the so-called planning searches, you can chip away at premeditation, and honestly, premeditation is the whole end game. It's the line between first degree and a woman in the midst of a psychotic break. So the real defense point is narrow and it's fair. You cannot hand every dark search to Lindsay and call it a plan when you cannot prove that she was the one searching. That is a reasonable doubt argument about the evidence. So theory number 3 is that it's Lindsay's phone that actually tells the whole story. Now, here's the evidence almost nobody is clipping, and it might be the most important in the whole trial because this is not the shared laptop. This is Lindsay's personal iPhone. State police did what they called an advanced logical extraction of it at the end of January 2023 and pulled her calls, her texts, images, and browser history. And the searches on there tell both stories at the exact same time, which is the entire case in a nutshell. On the mental illness side, in the weeks before the killings, her phone searched schizophrenia, psychosis, insomnia, bipolar disorder, postpartum depression, and hallucinations. This is clearly a woman, in my opinion, who was desperately seeking answers and was feeling like she was on an island alone, trying to figure all of this out because nothing she was being prescribed was working. Now, 4 days before the event, she also searched that phrase, "Can you treat a sociopath?" I mean, this is clearly a woman who knows something catastrophically is wrong with her and is trying to name it, label it, because you can't heal something if you don't know what it is. You can't solve a problem if you don't know what that problem is. If you can't name it, you're just going to be lost. But the conspiratorial side of me was also like, well, what if she is, starting to get scared of her husband and not feeling supported by him and wondering if he could be a sociopath, if he's like implementing all of these ideas into her head. Now, that is a completely off base, thought I had, and I just wanted to share it here because that was the first thing that popped into my head, honestly. But I think what's the most true here is that this is a woman who was just desperately seeking answers. Because this phone also has the same searches you might find on any mom's phone. Paw Patrol, a printable unicorn to color, baby foods, and it has notes that she wrote to herself. One was from late 2022, and it reads, "I am sad and depressed because I cannot parent my third child like my first." Another simply says, "I just want to feel happy." But the defense on cross walks through the other searches on that same phone, and these are the ones the prosecution leans on for planning. Where is the carotid artery? How to slit your throat and die? Can you turn the airbags off on a Kia Sorento? And she drove a Kia Sorento. Now, here is a wrinkle I'm including because it's fair and because the clips are leaving it out entirely. The trooper on the stand, Chiappini, actually said that he did not personally recall finding those 3 searches in his own extraction. It was Reddington who put them up on a big poster board and got him to confirm that they came from Lindsay's phone number. So there's been a small fight or discrepancy over exactly how these surfaced. And you cannot miss the text from that very morning because they cut against the cold planner picture. She texted Patrick that their daughter's urine sample came back fine, no kidney issue, and he texted back, "You're a good mama," with a smiley emoji. She asked if they could get takeout from a place called 3V because it'd been a long day. I mean, that's just a normal Tuesday. So the honest summary of this theory is that there's one phone, one woman searching psychosis and sociopathy with one thumb and arteries and airbags with the other, texting like everything is fine in between. There's no shared computer excuse here. And I think that's what's really frustrating about this premeditation argument is these are things she's planning to do to herself effectively, unless, of course, she had her children in the car and was trying to orchestrate some kind of accident that would also harm them, right? But I think as somebody that, I don't know, in college I had a really good friend of mine do this, hurt himself. And he was just one of those people that was the happiest person you'd ever met. You know, it would never have occurred to any of us that he was in so much pain. And the way he did it was a way that would take planning. And so I think it's really, really difficult to try to determine premeditation and make that the line between someone who attempted to unalive themselves and someone who was not successful in that attempt. It's kind of crossing this line. The only real premeditation that I think could be linked to harming her children is the one with the Kia, right? Or I guess the carotid too, if she was trying to, it's so tough. It's so tough because on one hand, I see a broken woman, and I can't even imagine the guilt you would feel being in a state of psychosis where you do something so horrific and you have to wake up from it and realize what you did. It's been heartbreaking watching Lindsay sit through this trial and listen to medical examiners and hear the 911 call, and it's absolutely gut-wrenching to see her. And it's just so hard. It's so hard because I believe that if the defense's read is the true one, that those same searches are the frantic, disordered behavior of a person searching sociopath and psychosis. You have a brain that is in a genuine state of break or breaking, and it's not like criminally responsible. I mean, and this is going to be the question that the jury has to answer. And that's going to be a really hard one to answer. So now there's this fourth theory. There was no fingerprints found on the murder weapon, which means someone else had to have done it. And this is where a lot of people are getting it really wrong online. And honestly, I don't blame them because there are two completely different things that are getting smashed into this one talking point. So here is the most accurate version I could find based on my memory and my research. So investigators did not recover usable fingerprints off the exercise bands or off a knife that was found in the home. That's all true, and that is what everybody has ran with. But Lindsay's DNA was found on the exercise bands, and both the prosecution and the defense agreed to that in court. No fingerprints is not the same as no evidence. Those are two completely different situations. And there's also a very boring reason why there might not have been any prints, which a retired FBI evidence expert spelled out pretty clearly, is that fingerprints need a very smooth, clean surface to hold on to. And exercise bands being so stretchy and textured rubber, and honestly, the whole family had probably been handling them for months, you're just not going to lift a clean fingerprint off of that. A knife somebody grips hard that might have blood in the mix smears around instead of leaving this clear, rigid pattern from a fingerprint. So the absence of prints is not necessarily a crack in the case. It's exactly what you would expect off of those kinds of surfaces. But people are insisting that this is the smoking gun in the case, so let's insist, okay? Let's pretend that the no fingerprints thing is very meaningful and it proves somebody else handled those bands. So that explains the DNA, which is Lindsay's and which both sides do agree to. But you can't build a mystery third strangler out of an absence of prints when the actual biological evidence that's present does belong to the defendant. The theory would need clean fingerprints to be the important forensic fact. The only situation in which I think this theory could plausibly be true is if the rest of the overarching theory of this whole case is true, like the umbrella that all these theories sit in, is that Patrick is playing puppet master, essentially, and leading Lindsay through this moment of psychosis to do these things to her children and ending up pinning it on her in the aftermath. Now, this fifth theory is kind of strange because it hasn't really been proven in court at all, and that's the sailor's knot. The theory goes that the exercise bands were tied in a specific complicated knot, a sailor's knot, that a labor and delivery nurse like Lindsay wouldn't know, but that someone with boating experience might. So obviously, people ran straight to Patrick. But the problem is, as of right now, the prosecution hasn't introduced any sailing knot theory. It is not in the case. It is this internet forensics theory. It's not a real courtroom one. And it actually runs against what the prosecution has done because they used the 911 call to argue that the bands were wrapped in a way that undercuts these complicated knot theories, not one that actually supports the theory. So the evidence that actually exists does point away from this. So if it changes, if prosecution introduces something real about a knot, I will cover it the day it happens. But until then, I'm not going to take a theory that has not really even been introduced in court and treated like a fact. But, if the prosecution someday were to put an expert on who said these bands were tied in a specific knot that a labor and delivery nurse would never know, that would be the first piece of genuine physical evidence in this entire case that's pointing beyond Lindsay. I mean, it would really blow the whole thing open, but that's a very, very big if. So theory 6 kind of surrounds this "one of her best days" comment. Patrick told police that the day of the killings had actually been one of Lindsay's best days in a while. And online, a lot of people hear that and they think, well, that's really suspicious. That sounds like a man describing a scene that he set up. But we have to look at the non-salacious version of this for a second. Because if you refer back to the overview of postpartum that I shared earlier, we discussed how the outward appearance can be a lot different than what's going on internally. And I just want to remind everybody from our postpartum discussion earlier, with postpartum depression, we talked about how something can be seemingly totally fine on the outside while the person is really tormented on the inside. And that when someone springs into this psychosis, they can go all the way to the other side of the spectrum. So I think it could be completely reasonable that Patrick thought his wife was getting better that day or having a good day. And that comment could be the reason he felt okay leaving the house to run a 15-minute errand. And it fits exactly what the experts keep saying about this specific illness, which is that a good day is not necessarily a safe day. Postpartum psychosis doesn't move in a straight line. Someone can look brighter, more like themselves, and still be in enormous danger. And the text from that morning back up the good day read rather than the sinister one. Now, let's just pretend that the sinister part of this story is true. And this is what the trial has kind of laid out here and what a lot of people are speculating online. Now, the details that came out in the trial could point to something more sinister. First of all, we have the detail that Patrick is an avid runner. He's run marathons. He loves to run. We know that much. We also know that he had to go on a CVS run to grab some medicine for one of his kids. So we texted Lindsay at CVS. They're out of the brand name for this medication. Is it okay if I get the generic version? And she responds, yep, get the generic version. So this sets up his alibi being out of the home at that time. Now, it also comes up in trial that he also purchased some Skittles. And online, sleuths are like, why would he get Skittles? Why weren't Skittles in the bag at home? There was the actual brand name of the medicine found in the CVS bag at home. So why would he have texted Lindsay that he couldn't find the brand name if the brand name is what he actually brought home? And also, where did the Skittles go? Why did they disappear? So there are a bunch of runners online now claiming that Skittles are their favorite form of fuel during long distance runs. They get a hit of sugar and they can keep running. So people are speculating that he did go to the CVS to try to solidify this alibi he had concocted. He essentially ran home and it took him like 15 minutes to get there. Something else that came up in trial was that doctors had essentially said, if you're not using medications anymore, give them to your husband and let him throw them away or manage them. But what seemed to be odd for a lot of people is that next to her bed, I believe the medication was, ground up. It looked like it had been ground up to put in something. So one would speculate that perhaps he dosed his wife and the children so that they would not be so scared, so they would feel less pain. So he runs home. He does this terrible act. He would have run back into town to pick up the food. And a lot of people are speculating all of this because by the time he shows up to the restaurant to pick up the food, he is in a different outfit and different shoes than what he was wearing at the CVS. So that would have meant he would have gone to CVS, taken all those Skittles, gone to his car, changed into his running shoes and maybe a different top, sprinted all the way home, did the act, sprinted all the way back to the restaurant, and picked up the restaurant. By that time, he was wearing his tennis shoes and a different top. People are also speculating that his friend is in on it because his best friend who helped corroborate his alibi looks a lot like him and looks a lot more like some of the images in the footage than he does. Of course, that's all speculation. So after all of that, he would have gotten his food, taken it home, and that's where he would have come home to that scene. And this is exactly why people are saying this is like a Chris Watts 2.0 type of situation. Because online sleuths are actually saying, like, honestly, we could piece this all together and make it work. But it would have to mean that Patrick is one of the most evil people you have ever met. I mean, he would have been practicing a long con. He would have been essentially brainwashing his wife, making her life really bad. He would have had to make her feel like she is crazy, gaslight her for months and months and months and months. And of course, we do not know what their dynamic was in the privacy of their own home. But what's really scary about all of this is that when you say it out loud, it feels like it could be plausible. But that leads me to theory number 7, is that essentially he left her alone knowing that she was dangerous, and that was an irresponsible thing to do. So all of this blame shouldn't be put on just her. Now, the defense raised this statement to kind of make a completely different point. Now, Reddington's argument is that not one doctor, not one nurse, nobody on her treatment team ever told Patrick that he should not leave Lindsay alone with the children. Nobody gave him that warning. And her providers explain why nobody did. They described a woman who, when they saw her, presented clear, linear thinking, who could advocate for herself, who understood the medications she was on, and who never stated a plan to hurt herself or her children. There was a nurse who testified that as late as the end of December, Patrick was telling them Lindsay was safe but wanted to go to McLean Hospital for inpatient care, that he was actively fighting to get her more help, not less. So the thing that looks like a husband recklessly leaving a dangerous person alone is really the entire system, and the professionals included, failing to see how severe it was until it's too late. And I think that's the defense's whole thesis, honestly. I actually don't think Reddington is trying to pin this all on Patrick. There is actually another active lawsuit where both Patrick and Lindsay have filed their own separate lawsuits against the medical establishments that they went to, basically begging for help, and they're essentially suing for malpractice. Now, I haven't looked into that lawsuit as extensively as this situation here, but I believe that Reddington is actually trying to get these health professionals to testify on the stand, which is public record, public information, will likely be able to set precedent and be used in another open court trial. He is trying to get them to essentially look really, really guilty here so that that case is more winnable for Lindsay. So I do believe that Reddington is not necessarily trying to pin this on Patrick. I think he's using tactics that hold Patrick more culpable for sure. And if it does blow up that he did this, I mean, it will be one of the most shocking situations I've ever seen in true crime. I don't know. I'm like torn because on one hand, like I just spoke through the whole timeline. I'm like, it could have happened. But then the more logical side of me, no, this is a woman who was failed by the medical profession, and we need to be better, and we need to offer more help, and we need to understand what's going on with women. So I really believe that Reddington is actually really trying to hold these healthcare professionals accountable so that her next trial is more winnable. Now, theory number 8 is that a doctor coached her into saying that she was hearing voices. And this is the newest one, and it's really messy, so try to follow along with me as closely as you can, because honestly, it was really, really muddy for me too. So first we have the setup. Patrick testified that while Lindsay was in the hospital after the killings, she called him and said that she had heard voices telling her to unalive the young ones. That's enormous because hearing voices is the heart of an insanity defense. So a couple of days later, Reddington is cross-examining a state trooper named Daniel Lawler, who had been assigned to guard Lindsay's hospital room door. And Reddington drops this question. He essentially asked, "Isn't it the prosecution's theory that the psychologist my team sent in, Dr. Paul Ziesel, the one I had to get a court order to even get into her room, coached Lindsay to call Patrick and claim she heard voices?" And that set the courtroom on fire. The prosecutor objected, the judge called a sidebar, and then he sent the whole jury out of the room to sort it out. So here's what deflates the entire theory. With the jury gone, Lawler admitted that this coaching idea did not come from the prosecutors at all. It came from a conversation he had with the lead detective, Josh McKelligan. When he was pressured, he agreed there was no investigative basis for the speculation and that he never actually heard what was said between Lindsay and the psychologist behind the closed door because he was out in the hall. So what we have is a theory that got floated in a hallway conversation between cops, and that the trooper himself basically walked back under oath, and that the jury may not even get to properly weigh. And this is such a flimsy moment in the trial, and it just goes to show how the police and the investigators really flopped this case. Because I saw somebody online talk about she was a woman and a mother, and she was like, "Can you imagine if this happened to me and I called the cops and I just said, 'Oh yeah, he did it'? They wouldn't investigate at all." There was no investigation. There was nothing. There was nothing besides this man saying, "Oh yeah, she told me she did it." And this is a woman who literally can't talk according to first responders. She can't talk. There was so much stress on her thyroid, she couldn't talk, she was non-responsive. And a lot of other people are pointing out that her body temperature was so insanely low that she had to have been cold and outside for a lot longer than just 15 to 30 minutes. So did this happen way earlier? What is going on? But the thing about this whole theory is that if true, it would actually be devastating for Lindsay, not Patrick. If she is fighting for her life, trying to say that all of this happened because she was experiencing postpartum psychosis, and essentially she had been coached by her attorney's own mental health representative, it would not be beneficial to her. It would make her look really, really bad. So now we have a piece that really makes Patrick look even more awful. So not only do we have everything we've laid out for you so far, okay? So if this whole orchestration theory is correct, we would essentially have to prove that somehow Patrick actually coerced Lindsay into doing this terrible thing, or he actually did all the things and pinned it on his postpartum wife. And because of this next theory, this is why it's starting to make a lot more sense for people, because it's reminding them again of Chris Watts. This is the affair theory. So people have pointed out that Patrick took a work trip to New York not long before the tragedy. And then they point out that after everything, he moved to New York and remarried a fertility doctor. And they connect those dots into a story where Patrick was having an affair and wanted out of the marriage. Now, people are alleging that he had an affair while his wife was in the hospital. We can't really verify that. We do see that he's left reviews on different hikes that he's taken with his new wife that people are pointing to that being very odd. So there's no real evidence to support it. And people are also giving more weight to this because they don't believe that Patrick is showing enough remorse in the courtroom. I feel like he's being very direct. He is not showing much emotion. And it is very strange to see, especially when, Lindsay is literally breaking down at hearing his 911 call, and it's really, really heartbreaking. Now, I still don't know where I land on this. I'm someone that I think it's easy for all of us to get swept up in the sensationalism, but I'm also watching the trial and a lot of the clips and a lot of the takes, and I feel like there is weight to what some people are saying. But I think we do need to make sure we're weighing all of the context. We're getting all of the context for very, very, very important, tragic situations like this. I want to bring us back to 2024 when Patrick sat down for an interview with the New Yorker. And he says, "I wasn't married to a monster. I was married to someone who got sick." Essentially putting postpartum psychosis on an international platform and asking humans to be more understanding of women and try to understand these health issues that it feels like sometimes nobody pays attention to. But if all of these theories are correct, and this was something that was actually orchestrated by this man or actually carried out by this man and put on his wife, him talking to the New Yorker would be one of the most bold things I've ever seen a serial killer do. Because at that point, he literally would be a family annihilator. 3 children are dead. Like I said, I keep kind of playing tennis between two different perspectives. I'm a Gemini, I guess that explains it. Because part of me is like, he very well could have done it. And then part of me is like, we need to make sure we're focusing on all of the facts and not get too swept up in sensationalism, because oftentimes sensationalism and the public response can sometimes destroy cases before they even get started. And I want to reiterate that not only does Lindsay have an open lawsuit for malpractice and medical negligence, Patrick also has a suit right alongside her against them. I mean, this is a woman who was grossly, grossly failed. She was over medicated. She was not taken seriously. And it was really too late by the time it got to as bad as it did. If we're going to trust that certain medication can help us, we have to trust that it's affecting our brain. So one would think that you can't just put someone on a cocktail of different drugs and expect them to heal and get better without considering the impact all of that's going to be having on this roller coaster of mental health. Now, there are a couple things I'd like you to take out of this. I want us to really be more open and empathetic to people who are experiencing mental health challenges. There's a lot that is going on inside people's heads and minds and lives that we'll never see. So I do think we need to give people the benefit of the doubt more. And I think that women need to be listened to and understood. And we just overall need more studies on our brains and our bodies because it's horribly underrepresented. And the other thing is that viral clips might state something that's technically true. I mean, the laptop was Patrick's. There were no fingerprints. He did leave the house. He did move on quickly. But that's not evidence, unfortunately. And again, we have to be skeptical, like I always say, of everything. I think we can be open to that possibility and observe the holes that we are seeing in the case, because I'm seeing them too, guys. I know which side I'm leaning on, but it's really too close to tell. But the real question here is what was going on inside this woman's mind. So I'm, again, leaving a lot of resources down in the pinned comment below. If there's anything I missed or any thoughts you want to share, please offer a polite discussion down in the comments below. I definitely want to hear from you. And please take care of yourselves. Please know that there are resources for you. Please know that you matter, you are important, and I really hope you have someone who is a safe space for you to reach out to if you need help. Thank you guys so much for being here with me today, and I will provide you updates as I get them, and I'm just really grateful for your time. Thank you guys all so much. I will see you in my next video very soon. Bye.